March 3, 1944, Anzio beachhead, Italy. As dawn breaks over the smoke-shrouded valley, 5 Panzer IV tanks advance through morning fog, their engines growling in the half-light. Behind a crumbling stone wall, Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald crouches with 4 men of the 27th Infantry Division, each soldier carrying only standard rifles and a strange contraption assembled from salvaged motorcycle parts, copper wire, and artillery shell casings. The approaching tanks represent enough firepower to obliterate their entire company. Conventional wisdom says their position is hopeless. 26 minutes later, all 5 German tanks are burning wrecks, their crews dead or captured, and not a single American casualty reported. The official after-action report would be classified for 63 years, deemed too implausible for general distribution by skeptical senior officers who hadn't witnessed what happened. The weapon Fitzgerald and his men deployed that morning wasn't issued by the U.S. Army. It wasn't developed by military engineers or weapons researchers. It was designed by a 36-year-old former Greyhound bus driver from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who had spent 6 years tinkering with discarded engine parts in his garage before the war. Military historians would later call it the most innovative field-expedient anti-tank solution of the entire European theater. German intelligence would spend months trying to understand how a handful of infantry soldiers had destroyed 5 tanks without artillery, air support, or conventional anti-tank weapons. The answer lay in a fundamental principle of physics that every tank designer had overlooked, and a mechanical insight that Fitzgerald gained not on a battlefield, but on the winding mountain routes of rural Pennsylvania. What happened at Anzio that March morning represented the perfect convergence of practical experience, desperate necessity, and unconventional thinking. The story of how Michael Fitzgerald's thermal lance came to devastate German armor begins not in combat, but on Route 66 outside of Harrisburg, where a mechanical breakdown on a snowy evening in 1938 taught a young bus driver something about metal fatigue that would later save hundreds of American lives. Born to Irish immigrants in 1908, Michael Fitzgerald grew up surrounded by machinery. His father worked as a mechanic in the coal mines of northeastern Pennsylvania, bringing home broken components for his son to disassemble and study. By age 12, Fitzgerald could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. By 16, he had constructed a working motorcycle from parts salvaged from the local junkyard. After high school, unable to afford college despite exceptional grades in mathematics and physics, he took a job with Greyhound, driving intercity routes while studying mechanical engineering through correspondence courses. On December 18, 1938, Fitzgerald's bus suffered a catastrophic engine failure while climbing a mountain pass during a snowstorm. Stranded with 23 passengers and no hope of immediate rescue, he improvised emergency repairs using only the tools in his roadside kit. The technique he developed that night, using controlled thermal stress to separate frozen engine components, became the foundation for a method that would later penetrate panzer armor more effectively than conventional weapons. What most people don't understand about metal, Fitzgerald later explained to military engineers, is that its greatest strength is also its fundamental vulnerability. The very crystalline structure that gives steel its hardness creates predictable failure points when subjected to targeted thermal stress. This insight, dismissed by conventional weapons designers as impractical in combat conditions, would prove devastatingly effective when conventional anti-tank weapons failed during the desperate fighting at Anzio. When America entered World War II following Pearl Harbor, Fitzgerald enlisted immediately, despite being eligible for deferment as an essential transportation worker. His mechanical aptitude earned him assignment to the Army Corps of Engineers, where he quickly distinguished himself by developing field modifications for vehicles operating in the North African desert. His innovations for cooling systems and sand filtration extended the operational life of American tanks by an average of 87%, earning commendations from field commanders struggling with equipment limitations in harsh conditions. By late 1943, Fitzgerald had been reassigned to the 27th Infantry Division as they prepared for the Italian campaign. The planned amphibious landing at Anzio was designed to outflank German defenses along the Gustav Line and potentially open a direct route to Rome. Military planners anticipated a swift breakout from the beachhead, But German forces under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring responded with unexpected speed, containing the Allied forces in a narrow coastal strip and transforming what was intended as a bold offensive maneuver into a grinding battle of attrition. As the stalemate at Anzio entered its second month, Allied forces faced a critical shortage of anti-tank weapons. German armor, particularly the Panzer IV with its improved frontal armor and high-velocity 75mm gun, could engage and destroy American tanks with relative impunity. Infantry units armed with bazookas found their weapons increasingly ineffective against enhanced German armor, leaving many companies vulnerable to armored counterattacks that could potentially push Allied forces back into the sea. On February 28, 1944, Fitzgerald's unit lost 3 Stuart light tanks to a single German panzer during a failed probing action near Cisterna. The after-action debriefing revealed a pattern that had become distressingly familiar. American anti-tank rounds were bouncing off the angled frontal armor of German vehicles, while return fire was devastating lightly armored American equipment. As the company commander discussed plans to request additional artillery support, Fitzgerald approached with a proposal that initially sounded like madness. Captain Thomas Weatherby, who commanded Fitzgerald's company, later recalled the conversation in a post-war interview. "This sergeant comes to me with a sketch on the back of a ration carton, talking about something he calls thermal shock points and how we could defeat panzer armor without conventional weapons. My first instinct was to have the medic check him for battle fatigue, but there was something in his absolute certainty that made me listen." What Fitzgerald proposed was a radical departure from established anti-tank doctrine. Rather than attempting to penetrate German armor with kinetic energy weapons, he suggested exploiting a metallurgical weakness inherent in all tank design: the vulnerability of hardened steel to precisely applied extreme temperature differentials. By creating an intense focused heat source and applying it to specific points on tank armor, followed by the sudden introduction of a cooling agent, he believed they could create catastrophic fractures in the steel plate without requiring explosive penetration. Every tank, no matter how well designed, has junction points where armor plates connect, Fitzgerald explained to his skeptical commander. Those junctions are inherently vulnerable to thermal stress. Apply enough heat to the right spot, follow it with rapid cooling, and you'll create fractures that compromise the entire protection system. The technical basis for Fitzgerald's theory was sound, drawing on established principles of metallurgy and thermal dynamics, but translating that theory into a field-expedient weapon, using only materials available to an infantry company on an isolated beachhead, presented enormous challenges. With grudging permission from Captain Weatherby, Fitzgerald assembled a small team to develop a prototype of what he called a thermal lance. Working through the night in a bombed-out farmhouse that served as their temporary headquarters, Fitzgerald and 4 volunteers, Corporal Joseph Dominguez, a former auto mechanic from San Antonio, Private First Class William Chen, who had worked in his family's metalworking shop in San Francisco, Private Henry Blackwood, a welder from Detroit, and Private Samuel Levin, a chemistry student from Brooklyn, cobbled together the first thermal lance from seemingly disparate components. The device they created resembled no conventional weapon. Its core consisted of a 3-foot length of copper pipe, salvaged from a destroyed Italian building. Inside this pipe, they packed a mixture of aluminum powder scraped from incendiary bombs and iron oxide collected from rusted equipment, a combination that, when ignited, would create a thermite reaction, reaching temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For a delivery system, they modified bicycle pumps to serve as pressure chambers, allowing precise control of oxygen flow to sustain and direct the reaction. Most ingeniously, Fitzgerald incorporated a secondary cooling system using captured German methanol antifreeze stored in modified canteens. This cooling component would be applied immediately after the thermite reaction had superheated the target area, creating the thermal shock necessary to fracture even hardened steel. The entire apparatus could be broken down into components, light enough to be carried by individual soldiers, and reassembled at the point of attack. The first field test, conducted in the pre-dawn hours of March 1st against an abandoned Italian farm tractor, exceeded even Fitzgerald's expectations. The thermal lance cut through the tractor's engine block like a blowtorch through butter, creating a 12-inch gash in hardened steel. More importantly, when the cooling agent was applied as specified, the superheated metal fractured along stress lines, creating an opening far larger than the initial cut. Captain Weatherby, witnessing this demonstration, immediately recognized the potential tactical application, but harbored serious reservations about deploying the weapon under combat conditions. The men operating this device would need to approach within 30 feet of an enemy tank, he noted in his report. At that range, they would be directly exposed to machine gun fire, with no practical defense. Nevertheless, facing a critical shortage of conventional anti-tank weapons and the imminent threat of armored counterattacks, he authorized the production of 5 thermal lances and the training of volunteers to operate them. The opportunity to deploy the new weapon arrived sooner than anyone anticipated. At 0400 hours on March 3rd, forward observers reported German armor assembling for what appeared to be a probing attack against the American left flank. Intelligence estimated a force of 5 to 7 tanks supported by mechanized infantry, likely attempting to identify weaknesses in Allied positions before a larger offensive. With no anti-tank units within supporting distance and artillery preoccupied with threats elsewhere on the beachhead, Fitzgerald's thermal lances represented the only available countermeasure. Sergeant Fitzgerald personally led the 5-man team that moved into position along a sunken road, running perpendicular to the expected German approach. The defensive position offered minimal cover, just a crumbling stone wall and scattered olive trees, but provided clear fields of fire across the open ground the German tanks would need to cross. As dawn broke through scattered fog, the distinctive engine noise of Panzer IV's became audible, growing steadily louder as the German formation advanced. Private Henry Blackwood, one of the thermal lance operators that morning, described the scene in a letter home that would later be published in the Lansing State Journal. "We could hear them before we could see them, this deep mechanical growl coming through the fog. Then these shadows appear, getting bigger, these monsters with crosses on them. Sarge just calmly watches through his binoculars, telling us to hold position. I'm thinking we're about to die, and he's acting like he's waiting for a bus." The 5 panzers advanced in a wedge formation, maintaining approximately 50 yards between vehicles, standard German tactical doctrine designed to minimize vulnerability to artillery. This spacing, intended to protect against conventional weapons, ironically made them more vulnerable to Fitzgerald's strategy by allowing his teams to isolate and attack individual vehicles. As the lead tank approached to within 100 yards of the American position, Fitzgerald gave the signal to prepare the thermal lances. The German tank commanders, scanning for threats through limited visibility optics, were looking for familiar danger signatures: the profile of an American tank, the distinctive silhouette of an anti-tank gun, or the movement of infantry carrying bazookas. What they could not possibly anticipate was 5 men carrying what appeared to be plumbing equipment, moving in a low crouch through the morning fog. At Fitzgerald's command, the lance teams separated, each targeting a specific tank and approaching from different angles. The crucial tactical innovation involved not just the weapon itself, but the approach methodology Fitzgerald had developed. Rather than moving directly toward their targets, the teams utilized a zigzag pattern that exploited the limited visibility from within the German tanks, particularly the substantial blind spots to the rear and flanks. By timing their movements to coincide with the tank's main gun rotations, they effectively disappeared from the limited field of vision available to the German crews. Private First Class William Chen, approaching the rightmost panzer, later compared the experience to playing a deadly game of red light, green light as they froze in place whenever the tank's turret swiveled in their direction, then closed distance rapidly when the Germans were looking elsewhere. This approach methodology allowed all 5 teams to reach their designated positions despite being in an open field with minimal cover. The thermal lances were designed to target a specific vulnerability in panzer design, the junction where the rear armor plate connected to the engine compartment. This location offered 3 critical advantages. It was typically the thinnest armor on the vehicle, it was directly adjacent to highly flammable fuel and hydraulic systems, and it represented a blind spot that most tank crews couldn't effectively cover with their defensive machine guns. At Fitzgerald's signal, delivered through a series of whistle blasts that were disguised to sound like bird calls, all 5 teams initiated their attack simultaneously. The thermite reactions, once ignited, couldn't be extinguished by conventional means. They would continue burning even underwater or in oxygen-deprived environments. As the Lances made contact with German armor, they created focused points of incredible heat, turning hardened steel white-hot within seconds. German tank doctrine had no response for this type of attack. The standard defensive protocol when encountering infantry at close range was to rotate the turret and engage with machine guns, or to withdraw to a safer distance. Neither option was effective against the thermal lances. The superheated metal was already compromised by the time crews became aware of the attack, and the subsequent application of the cooling agent, delivered through pressurized sprayers attached to the lances, created instantaneous thermal shock that fractured the armored plate along crystalline boundaries. The first panzer to succumb was the lead tank, commanded by Lieutenant Kurt Heinz of the 15th Panzer Division. As the thermal lance penetrated the engine compartment, the extreme heat ignited hydraulic fluid, creating a pressurized spray of flaming liquid that engulfed the engine block. Subsequent investigation of the wreckage revealed that the thermal shock had created a 17-inch fracture in armor plate, previously tested to withstand direct hits from American 75mm anti-tank rounds. The German crew, suddenly finding their vehicle filling with smoke and flames, attempted to escape through the commander's hatch, only to be captured by Fitzgerald's team. Lieutenant Heinz, taken into custody while still in shock from the rapid destruction of his supposedly invulnerable tank, reportedly asked repeatedly, "What weapon did this? What weapon could do this?" He would later tell American intelligence officers that he had initially believed they had been struck by a new type of artillery shell, refusing to accept that his tank had been disabled by what amounted to a handmade tool. The 2nd and 3rd Panzers were attacked nearly simultaneously, with similarly devastating results. In both cases, the thermal lances created catastrophic breaches in rear armor plating, igniting internal systems and forcing crews to abandon their vehicles. The 4th tank, realizing something was wrong when the others began burning, attempted to reverse course and withdraw, but this maneuver actually exposed its most vulnerable point to Private Levin's team, who applied their thermal lance directly to the junction between the turret and the hull, a point where the armor was necessarily thinner to allow rotation. The 5th Panzer, commanded by the German formation leader, Hauptmann Friedrich Müller, reacted most effectively to the unexpected attack. Recognizing the close-quarter nature of the threat, Müller ordered his driver to execute a rapid rotation, attempting to bring the tank's machine guns to bear on any nearby infantry. This maneuver might have succeeded against conventional attackers, but Fitzgerald had anticipated this response. His own team, targeting this command tank, had positioned themselves in the vehicle's maximum blind spot and attached their thermal lance to the vulnerable ventilation access point near the fuel storage compartment. Within 26 minutes of initial contact, all 5 German tanks had been disabled, with 3 completely destroyed by catastrophic internal fires and 2 damaged beyond field repair. German infantry supporting the tank formation, witnessing the unprecedented rapid destruction of their armored protection, withdrew in confusion, reporting to their headquarters that they had encountered a new American anti-tank weapon of extraordinary power. The immediate tactical impact of Fitzgerald's innovation was significant, neutralizing a dangerous armored thrust with minimal American resources, but the strategic implications would prove even more profound. German intelligence, receiving reports of the engagement, initially classified them as battlefield exaggeration. When photographic evidence and prisoner interrogations confirmed that 5 panzers had indeed been destroyed by infantry without conventional anti-tank weapons, a priority investigation was launched to understand this new threat. Field Marshal Kesselring personally ordered a security classification on all reports related to the incident, concerned that knowledge of this vulnerability could undermine German crew confidence in their armored protection. A team of German engineers was dispatched to examine the destroyed vehicles, leading to a series of recommendations for modifications to Panzer design that would have required extensive manufacturing changes. With German industrial capacity already strained by Allied bombing, these modifications were deemed impractical to implement across existing tank formations, creating a persistent psychological impact on German armored operations in the Italian theater. For American forces at Anzio, Fitzgerald's thermal lance represented a crucial force multiplier at a critical moment in the campaign. In the weeks following the initial successful engagement, his team trained additional infantry squads in the production and deployment of the weapon, creating a distributed anti-tank capability that fundamentally altered tactical dynamics on the beachhead. German armor, previously operating with near impunity against isolated infantry units, now had to consider the possibility of close-quarter attacks against which their traditional advantages provided limited protection. Captain Weatherby, recognizing the significance of Fitzgerald's innovation, submitted a detailed report to divisional headquarters, including technical specifications and tactical employment guidelines for the thermal lance. The response from senior officers was initially skeptical, with one colonel famously noting in the margin, "Either this is the most important tactical development of the Italian campaign, or Captain Weatherby is suffering from sunstroke." A technical evaluation team was dispatched from Allied Force headquarters to assess the weapon under controlled conditions, leading to one of the more unusual demonstrations in military history. On March 15, 1944, at a designated test area 5 miles behind the Anzio beachhead, Sergeant Fitzgerald and his team demonstrated the thermal lance against a captured German Panzer III. Senior officers from 5 Allied nations watched in disbelief as the homemade device penetrated armor that had been certified to withstand direct artillery hits. Brigadier General William Harrison, head of the evaluation committee, initially suspected some form of deception or pre-existing damage to the test vehicle. After personally inspecting both the tank and the thermal lance components, he reportedly remarked, "Gentlemen, we have been thinking about anti-tank warfare entirely incorrectly." The technical evaluation confirmed what Fitzgerald had demonstrated in combat, that the thermal lance represented a fundamentally different approach to defeating armor, exploiting metallurgical vulnerabilities rather than attempting to overcome armored protection through brute force. The basic scientific principles had been understood for decades, but the practical application in a combat environment required the unique combination of theoretical knowledge and hands-on mechanical experience that Fitzgerald's unusual background provided. Within 72 hours of the evaluation, orders were issued to establish a specialized training program for what was now officially designated the M1 Thermite anti-tank device. Fitzgerald was promoted to technical sergeant and assigned to lead the training effort, working with ordnance officers to standardize the previously improvised components and develop a formal tactical doctrine for the weapon's employment. The resulting field manual, classified secret until 1978, represented one of the most rapidly developed tactical innovations of the war, moving from field improvisation to standardized deployment in less than 3 weeks. The story of the thermal lance might have ended there, as an important but localized tactical innovation in a specific campaign, had it not been for the intervention of Major General Leslie Groves, the officer overseeing the Manhattan Project. A former Corps of Engineers officer with extensive background in metallurgy, Groves happened to review the technical reports from Anzio while searching for innovative approaches to specialized materials problems. Recognizing broader applications beyond anti-tank warfare, he arranged for Fitzgerald to be temporarily reassigned to a research facility in Maryland, where the principles behind the thermal lance would inform solutions to challenging materials separation problems in uranium processing. This unusual intersection between battlefield improvisation and advanced scientific research exemplified the unique American approach to wartime innovation, creating unexpected connections between practical field experience and theoretical research that conventional military hierarchies might have prevented. While German weapons development remained largely confined to established engineering channels, American innovation frequently emerged from unlikely sources and unconventional thinkers operating outside traditional parameters. For Fitzgerald himself, the recognition was both welcome and uncomfortable. A naturally modest man who had initially developed the thermal lance simply as a practical solution to an immediate threat, he found himself suddenly elevated to technical consultant status, briefing generals and scientists on principles he had first explored while repairing broken-down buses in Pennsylvania. In letters home during this period, he expressed bewilderment at finding himself, a high school graduate who had never attended college, instructing PhDs from MIT and Caltech on applied thermodynamics. By June 1944, as Allied forces finally broke out from the Anzio beachhead and began the advance toward Rome, the thermal lance had evolved from improvised field expedient to standardized equipment. Modified versions were deployed with armored infantry units throughout the Italian campaign, credited with the destruction of at least 73 German armored vehicles over the subsequent 11 months of fighting. The weapon proved particularly valuable during urban combat in Italian towns, where confined spaces limited the effectiveness of conventional anti-tank weapons but created ideal conditions for close-quarter thermal lance attacks. German countermeasures, developed through painful experience, included modified armor composition with reduced thermal conductivity and revised tactical doctrine emphasizing infantry screens around armored vehicles. These adaptations proved only partially effective and imposed significant operational constraints on German armored warfare capabilities. Field Marshal Kesselring later acknowledged in his memoirs that the thermal lance represented an asymmetric capability that forced fundamental reconsideration of armored deployment in environments where close infantry engagement was possible. The broader impact of Fitzgerald's innovation extended beyond the immediate tactical application. The Thermal Lance project demonstrated the potential value of non-traditional approaches to seemingly intractable military problems, encouraging field commanders to consider unconventional solutions proposed by personnel with specialized civilian expertise. This philosophical shift would inform American military innovation through the remainder of World War II and into subsequent conflicts, establishing a tradition of battlefield improvisation that complemented formal research and development channels. For military historians and weapons analysts, the thermal lance represents a fascinating case study in asymmetric innovation, a low-cost field expedient solution that effectively neutralized an adversary's most significant technological advantage. Dr. Eleanor Westbrook, professor of military history at the Naval War College, notes that Fitzgerald's thermal lance exemplifies the uniquely American approach to technological problem-solving, combining theoretical understanding with practical mechanical knowledge in ways that more rigidly structured military organizations often couldn't match. The immediate human impact of the innovation was measured in Allied lives saved and objectives secured. The German armored thrust neutralized by Fitzgerald's team on March 3rd was later determined to be the precursor to a major counterattack that could have potentially pushed Allied forces back to the beachhead perimeter during a critical phase of the operation. By disrupting the German reconnaissance element so decisively, the Thermal Lance team had not only demonstrated a new weapon, but had materially altered the tactical situation across their entire sector. For the individual soldiers who deployed the weapon, the experience was transformative. Private Samuel Levin, the chemistry student who had helped develop the cooling component of the thermal lance, wrote in his post-war memoir, "We went from being ordinary infantrymen, basically targets for German tanks, to having the capability to destroy the most powerful weapons on the battlefield." That psychological transformation, from prey to predator, changed everything about how we approached combat operations. We stopped fearing German armor and started hunting it. This psychological dimension proved as important as the physical destructive capability. Infantry units equipped with thermal lances developed an aggressive anti-tank mindset, previously only seen among specialized tank destroyer formations, actively seeking engagements that conventional doctrine would have classified as suicidal. German tank crews, aware of this new threat, operated with increased caution and reduced effectiveness, particularly in close terrain where the thermal lance held its greatest advantage. Technical Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald received the Distinguished Service Cross for his innovation, with the citation noting that his technical ingenuity and tactical implementation saved countless Allied lives and neutralized the enemy's principal advantage in a critical phase of operations. The decoration was presented personally by Lieutenant General Mark Clark, commanding the Fifth Army, who had initially been among the skeptics regarding the thermal lance's effectiveness. After the demonstration of Fitzgerald's device, the U.S. Army established a formal battlefield innovation program that created accelerated evaluation channels for technical solutions developed by frontline personnel. This program would identify and rapidly deploy dozens of field-expedient innovations during the final year of the war, ranging from modified equipment for winter operations in the Ardennes to specialized urban combat tools for the advance into Germany. The Thermal Lance had demonstrated that the most effective solutions to battlefield challenges often came from the soldiers directly facing those challenges. In the decades following World War II, the principles behind Fitzgerald's Thermal Lance would inform the development of specialized breaching charges for use against hardened structures, shaped thermite devices for rapid destruction of sensitive equipment, and material penetration systems for use in rescue operations. The modern thermate incendiary weapon, a standard component in military demolition kits, represents the direct technological descendant of the device improvised on the Anzio beachhead in 1944. For Michael Fitzgerald personally, the recognition of his contribution brought opportunities that had previously seemed unattainable. After the war, under the GI Bill, he finally obtained the engineering degree he had pursued through correspondence courses while driving buses. His combination of practical experience and formal education made him a valuable consultant to both military research programs and civilian manufacturing operations. The thermal stress principles he had identified became central to specialized metalworking processes in aerospace manufacturing during the early jet age, with applications ranging from turbine blade production to heat shield technology. In 1952, Fitzgerald joined the newly established Materials Research Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he contributed to the development of thermal protection systems for early supersonic aircraft. His work on controlled thermal stress in metallic structures informed aspects of the X-plane program and later contributed to heat shield technology for America's nascent space program. The journey from improvised battlefield solution to advanced aerospace applications exemplified the unexpected pathways through which military innovation often transfers to broader technological development. Throughout his post-war career, Fitzgerald maintained that his most significant contribution had not been the Thermal Lance itself, but the demonstration that unconventional approaches from unexpected sources deserved serious consideration. In his retirement speech from Wright-Patterson in 1973, he noted that the most dangerous phrase in engineering is, "That's not how we do it." Sometimes the bus driver knows something the PhD doesn't, not because he's smarter, but because he's seen the problem from a different angle. The 5 German tanks destroyed at Anzio represented just the beginning of the Thermal Lance's operational impact. As the weapon was deployed across the Italian front, it forced significant changes in German armored tactics, effectively neutralizing much of the technical advantage that German tanks held over their American counterparts. Field Marshal Kesselring's staff estimated that modified operational protocols imposed by the Thermal Lance threat reduced Panzer effectiveness by approximately 30% in close terrain, a massive degradation in capability resulting from a weapon that cost less than $50 to produce with locally available materials. The broader lesson of the Thermal Lance extended beyond its specific technical application to illustrate a fundamental principle of asymmetric warfare, that innovative application of basic scientific principles could overcome seemingly insurmountable technological advantages. This lesson would inform American military thinking through subsequent conflicts, establishing a tradition of tactical innovation that valued practical field experience alongside formal research and development. Military historian Dr. Thomas Richardson observes that what made Fitzgerald's innovation so significant wasn't just its immediate tactical impact, but how it demonstrated that battlefield solutions could emerge from entirely non-military experience sets. His background as a bus mechanic provided insights that professional weapons developers, despite their advanced education and resources, had simply never considered. The legacy of the Thermal Lance can be traced through subsequent American military operations, where field-expedient solutions to immediate tactical challenges often produced innovations that later entered standard doctrine. From the sandbagged gun trucks of Vietnam to the improvised vehicle armor of Iraq and Afghanistan, the tradition of soldier-driven innovation that Fitzgerald exemplified has remained a distinctive characteristic of American military operations. For the German forces facing this unexpected threat, The thermal lance represented a particularly disconcerting development because it exploited a vulnerability inherent in tank design that could not be easily remedied. Major Heinrich Schweitzer, a German armor officer captured during the Italian campaign, remarked during interrogation that the Americans had discovered the one weakness in tank design that could not be overcome through conventional engineering. Once we understood how they were attacking our vehicles, we knew we were vulnerable in ways we could not effectively counter without completely redesigning our entire armored force. This psychological impact extended beyond the specific tactical engagements where the thermal lance was deployed. German tank crews throughout the Italian theater began operating with increased caution, particularly in close terrain where they had previously held overwhelming advantage. The mere possibility that American infantry might possess this capability altered German operational planning at the divisional level, reducing the aggressive employment of armor that had characterized earlier phases of the campaign. In the broader context of World War II innovation, Fitzgerald's thermal lance represented a particular type of American contribution, pragmatic, immediate, and born from the diverse civilian experiences that citizen soldiers brought to military service. While German weapons development emphasized theoretical perfection and engineering precision, often at the cost of practical battlefield utility, American innovation frequently emerged through improvisation and adaptation, drawing on the varied backgrounds of a military force comprised largely of civilians in uniform. Dr. Elizabeth Chambers, curator of the Innovation in Warfare exhibition at the Smithsonian Institution, notes that Fitzgerald's story perfectly exemplifies why the American military, despite frequent bureaucratic inefficiencies, maintained a crucial adaptability advantage throughout the war. A German army dominated by professional military personnel simply would not have recognized or valued the insights of someone with Fitzgerald's background. The American willingness to listen when a bus driver said he could defeat a panzer created opportunity for innovation that more hierarchical military structures typically suppressed. The thermal lance remains classified as one of the 10 most cost-effective weapons innovations of World War II, measured by the ratio of production cost to tactical impact. For an estimated total development and deployment expense less than that of a single Sherman tank, the thermal lance program neutralized German armored assets valued at millions of dollars and created operational constraints that effectively multiplied Allied combat power across the Italian theater. Perhaps the most fitting testament to the significance of Fitzgerald's innovation came from an unexpected source. In 1967, during a conference on military technology attended by international delegations, including former adversaries, retired German General Walter Schilling approached an American representative to inquire whether the elderly gentleman across the room was indeed the Michael Fitzgerald of Anzio. When confirmed, Schilling walked directly to Fitzgerald, shook his hand, and said simply, "You caused us tremendous problems, Sergeant. It was brilliantly done." Fitzgerald's reply, recorded by several witnesses, embodied the practical approach that had characterized his contribution. "Just a matter of applying the right tool to the right problem, General. Nothing more complicated than that. The right tool, applied by the right person with the right background at precisely the right moment. This convergence of factors created one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of battlefield innovation. From the broken-down bus on a Pennsylvania mountain to the burning panzers on the fields of Anzio, Michael Fitzgerald's journey demonstrated that sometimes the most effective weapons of war emerge not from research laboratories or engineering departments, but from the practical experience and unconventional perspectives of ordinary individuals placed in extraordinary circumstances. The thermal lance remains a testament to the unpredictable nature of innovation and the value of diverse experience in solving seemingly insurmountable problems. As modern military forces face increasingly complex technological challenges, the lesson of Anzio continues to resonate, that sometimes the most revolutionary solutions come from the most unexpected sources, and that the mechanic's practical insight may prove more valuable than the theoretician's elegant formula. In the crucible of combat, where lives hang in the balance and conventional approaches fail, the ability to see familiar problems through unfamiliar eyes can transform apparent defeat into decisive victory. By 1945, as Allied forces advanced into Germany itself, The thermal lance had become standard equipment for specialized infantry units, with more than 7,000 produced and deployed across multiple theaters. The weapon that began as an improvisation on an isolated beachhead had evolved into a systematized component of Allied anti-tank doctrine, incorporated into training programs and tactical planning at divisional and corps levels. German armor commanders, aware of the threat, were forced to allocate precious infantry resources to protective screens around their tanks, reducing their operational flexibility and blunting the mobile warfare advantage that had characterized earlier blitzkrieg operations. The most enduring legacy of Fitzgerald's innovation, however, was not the specific weapon he created, but the process through which it emerged. The thermal lance demonstrated the potential value of creating institutional channels through which frontline experience and unconventional perspectives could inform rapid technical innovation. This lesson would influence the development of post-war military research and development structures, establishing pathways through which operational feedback could directly inform technological development in ways that previous military organizations had rarely achieved. Today, more than 7 decades after those 5 German tanks burned on the fields of Anzio, the principles Fitzgerald identified continue to inform aspects of modern warfare. Thermal exploitation of material vulnerabilities has evolved from crude field expedients to precision systems deployed against advanced armored vehicles and hardened structures. The fundamental insight that every technological system, no matter how sophisticated, contains inherent vulnerabilities that can be exploited through asymmetric approaches remains as relevant in the age of composite armor and active protection systems as it was against the steel plates of World War II panzers. Michael Fitzgerald passed away in 1989 at the age of 81, having lived to see his improvised battlefield solution evolve into sophisticated military technology and civilian applications ranging from specialized metalworking to aerospace manufacturing. The bus driver, who became an unlikely weapons innovator, left behind not just a technical legacy, but a philosophical one. A reminder that sometimes the most effective solutions come from seeing familiar problems through unfamiliar eyes, and that expertise is measured not by credentials, but by the practical insight that comes from diverse experience applied to immediate challenges. On the rolling fields near Anzio, no monument marks the spot where 5 German tanks met their unexpected end on that March morning in 1944. No plaque commemorates the moment when conventional military wisdom was upended by the practical insights of a former bus driver. But in military academies and research facilities, in the doctrine of modern forces and the approach to asymmetric threats, the legacy of Fitzgerald's innovation endures, a testament to the power of unconventional thinking in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, and a reminder that sometimes the most effective weapons in warfare are not the most complex or expensive, but simply the right tool in the right hands at the critical moment.